Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to build a simple IR remote with the Quantum system. What you're going to need are 12 male-to-male jumper wires, a Q client, 4 buttons, and an IR LED. So let's get started with this. We already have the buttons and the LED arranged on our breadboard. What we've simply done is we've taken the buttons, placed them on the breadboard, and then we have from the positive voltage rail a male-to-male jumper wire connected to each of the buttons. And then we have a ground wire from the ground rail connected to the ground lead on our LED. With this IR LED and with most LEDs, this short lead or the short leg represents the ground line, and the long leg represents the positive voltage side. So we're going to go ahead and stick the short leg into the breadboard with the one that's connected to the ground rail. Okay, so now from here, we're going to connect all of the buttons to the builder base. And so we'll just take a male-to-male wire and connect the first one, starting from the left, to GP1. And then the next button we will connect to GP2. Next one to GP3. And the last button to GP4. And lastly, we will connect the long leg of the IR LED to GP0. All right, after that's done, we can go ahead and connect our breadboard to power and ground. So we're going to go ahead and take one of our last remaining male-to-male jumper wires. We'll connect it to the 5-volt port on the builder base. Then we'll go ahead and connect that to the positive rail that all of the buttons are connected to. And then we'll go ahead and take another male-to-male jumper wire and we'll stick that one in the negative rail. And we'll then connect the other end of that wire to ground. Okay, so that's it for this circuit. It's relatively simple. Where things get a little bit more complicated is in programming the application, but we'll walk you through all of those steps. So now we're going to go on over to our server and we'll build the firmware, and we'll also make sure that our infrared database service is set up and operational. Okay, so from your server home screen, navigate to the library. Once you're at the library, go to the Services tab and then download the infrared service. What this does is it installs our infrared database, which is essentially just a collection of manufacturers, devices, configurations, and then ultimately these infrared hex codes that you're able to interact with programmatically in our application builder to very quickly and easily grab IR codes that you can use with most of the devices found in your home. Okay, so now once that's set up, go ahead and navigate to your firmware builder. Hit Create New. We'll name this one IR Remote. From there, click the Add Hardware button, and then add one IR emitter, and we'll just name this one IR Emitter. Add that device, and then we're going to go ahead and add 4 buttons. We'll just name them B1 through B4. Okay, now with all of those buttons added, we're going to go ahead and configure all of the drivers in this firmware. So for the IR emitter, hit the IR emitter driver and select the GP0 pin. For B1, select the GPIO driver, set the pin to GP1, debounce to enabled, and pin mode to input pull down. For B2, we'll do all of the same configuration, except this pin will be set to GP2. B3 will be the same driver. The pin will be GP3. Debounce is enabled, and pin mode is input pull down. And the same is true for B4, except we'll be setting this pin to GP4. Debounce enabled, pin mode, input pull down. So once all of your devices are configured, go ahead and save your firmware. Once that's saved, go ahead and power on the client that you built your circuit on. Make sure it's paired to your system. And once your client's powered on, go ahead and hit the Actions button next to the firmware name, hit the Upload button, and then upload the firmware to your client. Now, while that's uploading, we'll go ahead and get started on building our application. So, navigate to your Applications page, select the Create New button. We're going to name this app IR Remote. Once you've named it, hit the Create button. You'll be taken to the application canvas. From here, we're going to add all of our hardware objects. So we'll start with the 4 buttons. So drag 4 of the button hardware objects onto the screen. And then add the IR emitter. Okay, so now with all of those on the screen, we're just going to go ahead and name them very quickly. It saves us headaches down the line. So you do that by selecting the object and then editing the name in the Properties panel on the right side of the screen. And you need to make sure that every single time you change something in your Properties panel, you hit the little Save Properties button on the bottom right of the screen. If you don't, the changes you made will not be saved. All right, so now with all of those hardware objects, we're gonna start with the programming. So the way this application is gonna work is each button is gonna trigger a static string object that houses the infrared hex code that will ultimately be sent to the IR emitter. Each of those hex codes will be selected via our IR database. So we're going to get started with just connecting the buttons to the string objects and have those connected to the emitters. And then we'll build the drop-down menu that will allow us to quickly and easily select our hex codes. Okay, so now from here, go ahead and drag a static string, 4 of them, onto the canvas. All right, and just make sure they're in line with each of the buttons. Now we're going to create a little bit of space between each of the buttons for what will be coming later. All right, so now I'm going to name each of these static string objects according to the button that they'll be connected to. So I'm just going to name them B1 through B4. Okay, so now once all those are named, we're going to drag a connection from the state port on the button to the trigger port on the static string object. Then we'll connect the string out port to the value in port on the IR emitter object. We'll be doing that for each of these static string object button combinations. All right, so you can see here we've spread out the button static string combinations just a little bit. That's to give us more room for what we're about to do. So you're going to want to head and drag go to your service panel and pull out 4 infrared service objects. Each one of these will be used to get the code for each one of your static string objects. And arrange them so that the infrared object lies above your static string object, its corresponding static string object. We're going to name each one of these infrared objects as we name the other ones, the other objects. So we're going to name the infrared object that corresponds to the first set of buttons B1, and so on and so forth. Perfect. Okay. So now, with each of these objects, you're going to want to pair a drop-down menu to each of them. This is an interface object that will allow the arrays that are sent out of the infrared object to be stored in the drop-down object, so that on your dashboard you can go ahead and select the brand, device, configuration, and the action that you would like. This will allow you to actually select the appropriate hex code to be sent to the IR emitter. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through how to do the first one, but the setup will be the same for each button pair. So what you need to do for this infrared object is from the brand out port, send that to the array on the dropdown. And then from the value out port on the dropdown, send that value to the brand import on the infrared object. So we're going to do this for each of the ports with a new dropdown. So now from the device out port, connect that to the array import on the dropdown, and then connect the value out port from the dropdown to the device import on the infrared object. We'll do the same with the configuration. And then we'll do the same, lastly, with the action. So connect the action output to the array import on the dropdown, and the value output from the dropdown to the action import on the infrared object. Okay, so then once all of that is done, we can connect the code output from the infrared object to the string import on the corresponding static string object. So basically on your dashboard, you will go through and select the brand, and then the device, and then the configuration, and then the action that you would like to perform. Once you've made all of those selections, a code will then be sent out of this object and into the static string port. So every time you press this button, the static string object is triggered, and that code is sent to the IR emitter. We're going to go ahead and name each one of these dropdowns. We'll name this one B1, but then we'll label them for the port that they are supporting. So the first one will be brand. The second one will be B2 devices. The third one will be B2 or B3 configs. And the fourth one will be actions. Sorry, excuse me, these will all be labeled B1. Sorry, I messed up there. Okay, perfect. That looks good. Going to go ahead and save the application. And now one last step for this infrared object is we need to initialize the infrared database. So the way we'll do that is with an initial trigger object, and we'll connect this initial trigger to each one of the infrared objects that we use. Okay, so we'll connect the trigger out port to the load brand ports on the infrared object, and we'll do that for all subsequent infrared objects. Perfect. So now we're going to go ahead and set up the rest of these infrared objects, and you should do the same and follow the same exact procedure I detailed. And yeah, we'll do a quick little time lapse here. All right, so now you can see here we have all of the IR database objects paired to the drop-down menus, and we have it slightly organized, but I'll just walk you through the basic principles going on here again. So basically we have this initial trigger that initializes each and every one of these IR databases. And so once those are initialized, the drop-down menus or the arrays of the brands is sent out and sent into this first drop-down menu array port. And then once you go ahead and select the value you want for that drop-down, it's sent back into this brands port. And then once that is done, the device out port then sends out the array for the next drop-down menu, so on and so forth until you've fully configured that drop-down menu or that infrared service to select the appropriate hex code that you want. And so that basic sequence is like you select Sony for your brand, a TV for the device. Your configuration would probably be 1.1, the standard one. And then your action, which would be power off, volume up, volume down. And once you've made all of those selections, a code will be sent out into the static string object. And that's going into the static string trigger, or the static string port. And so now once you actually hit the B1 hardware button, it will send this string out, the hex code, to the IR emitter, which will then send out the appropriate IR pulse from the emitter. So now from here, all we have left to do with this application is build it on the dash builder. So we're going to need to add 3 more tabs. Okay, so now once that's done, we can go ahead and add each of these drop-down interface objects to its corresponding tab. So that means that on the dashboard, you'll have each one of these drop-down menus that corresponds to the first button, the second button, third button, and the fourth button on their own individual tabs. This will make it much easier for selecting the appropriate hex code for the button. Okay, so once you have the 4th tab, you're then going to select the group. You're going to go to your object interface, and for each tab, you'll select, for each button, you'll select tab 1 through 4, and then group 1, and then now you have all of these gadgets to select from. So tab 1 currently houses all interface objects on it. You can see B1, B1, B2, B3, B4. So we're going to go through and we're going to actually select tab 2 to start with. And so on tab 2, we're going to have all B2 button 2 objects. So just go through and select all of the remaining B2 objects. And once you make a selection from here, those objects will then be removed from the list. So you can just go ahead and select every single B2 labeled interface object. So now once that's done, go ahead and navigate to tab 3. And you're going to go ahead and add all B3 objects. Okay, and now that that's done, we'll go ahead and do the last button grouping, which is B4. Wonderful. Now with that done, go ahead and save your application. And now we can go ahead and map the application and run it, and we'll see it work on a TV. Okay, so now to map this application, hit the play button. Oh, before you do that, ensure that your infrared service is running. So to do that, navigate to your services page, and then hit the action button and select Start from the drop-down menu. Okay, so now we can return to our applications page, hit play, and then we'll go ahead and map each button to its corresponding driver. So B1 goes to B1, B4 to B4, the IR emitter is mapped to the IR emitter, B3 is mapped to B3, and B2 is mapped to B2. Now go ahead and hit Save plus Run. We can then navigate over to our dashboard. Okay, now you can select the IR remote application. You can see here we have each of our tabs. In each tab, tab 1 corresponds to button 1, or the leftmost button on our breadboard, and tab 4 corresponds to B4, which is the rightmost button. Now we can go ahead and the initial start loaded all of the brands, and so we're going to select Sony. Then for the for the device, we'll select TV. For the configuration, we'll select 1, -1, and for the actions, we'll select power. Power on off. For tab 2, we'll go through the same selection, except we'll be selecting a different action. So Sony TV, configuration 1, -1, action, we'll do channel up. Brand, of course, we'll select Sony. Then we'll select TV. Configuration 1, -1, action, channel down. Now for the last tab, we'll select Sony TV in 1, again. But for this action, we'll select input. All right. So now you can see here, once I press this button, the IR emitter will trigger. Infrared wavelengths are not actually visible to the human eye, but you might be able to see this on the camera. All right, so we're back here at our TV. We're going to show you how this IR remote works. So we will not be needing this. So we're going to turn on our TV, and then we'll turn the volume up. We'll cycle it down, and then we'll turn it off. All right, so that's the basics for our IR remote projects. Yeah, this will exist in a much more complicated form in the near future. We hope you had fun building this project. And if you liked the video, please consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks so much. We hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the rest of our videos. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the notification button for updates. You can also follow us on social media. Thanks for watching.